The next talk is one I'm really proud and happy to have posited to Frank to do this, because we owe him a huge debt of gratitude for his long career in hurricane research. So he's going to give us about 40 minutes or so on his long career. So you get about a minute a year, Frank. So don't go too in depth in your storytelling, but thank you very much.
I don't hope I go that long. It's been a long time. Yeah, I want to thank Aaron, Gopal, and Will for talking me into this. I have been kind of a corporate memory for them. For those who don't know, I'm in the middle of phased retirement. I started on August 1st, so I'm a half-timer. I'm enjoying it, and I'm enjoying keeping interacting. Next slide, please, Jen. I have the clicker. Good. So I want to tell you something about how HFIP got started. It actually started about 10 years before there was such a thing as HFIP. And this is the kind of timeline I'm going to talk to. Back in 96, 97, U.S. Weather Research Program existed. And they pulled together a bunch of groups of people that they called prospective development teams. And the first team kind of laid out, selected researchers, laid out kind of what USWRP should focus on. And one of those things was hurricanes at landfall. And so a good friend of mine, Rich Carbone, who was USWRP chief scientist, said, Frank, would you mind leading a prospective development team? This is 95, 96, and pull together researchers to talk about what are the issues. So that was kind of the start of my path. That followed up with a workshop where Russ Ellsbury and I chaired a workshop in Miami where we brought 51 people together to talk about the problem, lay out the scope from what PDT5 had kind of emphasized. And then Russ Ellsbury and I also put together an implementation plan out of that, which I'll talk about. The Joint Hurricane Testbed came out of that implementation plan. And for those who might be interested, our proposal at the time was an appendix to our plan, and it was calling for a Hurricane Operational Transition Place, or HOT. So those of you who know about HOT now, we had that acronym already, but you can have it. So that became the Joint Hurricane Testbed. Then somewhere along the line in 2003, I ended up getting talked into becoming director of HRD. And at that time, we were working on a number of projects. Ed Rappaport and I worked with the research community to put together a plan called Attacking the Hurricane Intensity and Inland Flood Forecast Problem. And the National Science Foundation and NOAA had a social economic working group that met in Pomona and wrote a series of papers on what the social, behavioral, economic issues were related to hurricanes. So what I'm trying to say is a lot of this stuff had germs in the past. The seeds were planted, but it took a while and some serendipity, and those two big red clouds in the middle were the serendipity that tipped the iceberg forward. We had the 2004 season where 4 hurricanes hit Florida. Then we had the 2005 season, which had a record number of storms, including Katrina and Rita, and Dennis and Cindy, that all hit U.S. landfalls and got the attention of NOAA leadership. And so at that time, also, we were starting the intensity forecast experiment at HRD because we realized we had to partner with operations to continue to collect data. But we were, all these things were happening in kind of a chain of events that are a blur in some ways. It took me a while to even pull them all together here. All the links will be available if you want to go back and look at them. But following the 06, 04, and 05 seasons, Admiral Lautenbecker, then the head of NOAA, went to the Hurricane Center and EMC and HRD and said, what can I do? How can I get more funds for you guys so that we can do better? The answer he got back was not satisfying to him, so he went to the Science Advisory Board of NOAA and said, I want to have a working group on hurricane intensity research to identify the problems. So he did that. That group met in 6 and 7, wrote a report that had many, many recommendations. And then, courtesy of my boss at the time, Bob Atlas, I got seconded to lead the response to that, which then became HFIP. So I'm going to walk you through some of these things. I kind of gave you the timeline here, and we'll see what I can tell you about it. So USWP era, roughly 96 to 2002, although JHT and USWP have been going on continuously until now. They're part of HOT. So USWP has a long tail. But the thing, the outcome of this PDT was we were really looking at what Jamie brought out. We were starting at impacts, okay, and backing out what we'd have to do to improve the communication to the public. We realized we had to integrate components of track intensity and damage, mitigation. We knew that observations were going to be critical of both the atmosphere and ocean. We knew we needed a synergy between observations and models development to isolate the physical processes. We knew that emerging technologies would provide tools to improve understanding and predictability. Because at that time, the Doppler radars were available. We had SFMR just coming online. Dropsondes were relatively new. G4 had just started in 97. So we just had GPS dropsondes for maybe a year before this was happening. Cost-benefit ratio, we realized was going to be high and had a broad impact on social issues, such as where we live, building codes, preparations, and evacuation procedures. And so this was our kind of banner storm, was Hurricane Opal in 1995, which formed in the Gulf of Mexico. Within a day, it intensified rapidly to a very intense Category 4 hurricane. And then within another day, weakened back to a Cat 1 just before landfall. And this was when all of a sudden ocean heat content became an issue. This report, thanks to my co-lead, Nick Shea, brought the ocean mixing into the problem, clearly. And I would say the roots of that really came from Toga Core, which was in 92 and 93, and understanding the linkages between the ocean and its impact on atmospheric processes. So this is really the crux. If you go back and look at this paper and read it, and I did just recently, I was blown away kind of about all the things we found in them. Then came the workshop. We had the workshop in Miami. We had 51 people come. And so we really started thinking about the problem in another radical way. We thought of tropical cyclone hurricane landfall impacts in 2 stages, really, 2 periods. The landfall, coastal and inland communities, the risk of TC hazards and possible remnants. And we realized that that had to be focused on structure, not on intensity. That the structure will be driving the impacts. It drives the surge, it drives the wind impacts, and then obviously the rainfall. And then there was pre-landfall, where track is the dominant issue. And so we separated these two when we looked at the research priorities in these 2 separate areas. We didn't want to compound them. And we clearly said structure had to be the issue. And we actually defined landfall as the time that the 35-knot winds occur at the coast, not when the eye crosses, when the 35-knot winds arrive. And so we defined a lot of this, and then we put it into an implementation plan. Then came a colloquium. And these are the people, we had 31 people in the colloquium, and the people highlighted in red became our community of researchers for the next generation. This was put together by Bob Gall, Wen Chao Lee, and myself. It was an ASP UCAR colloquium. It's probably the only one that they've ever had on hurricanes. Happened in '98. We had 1 week in Boulder, 1 week in Miami. The University of Miami was gracious enough to let us use their facilities. And so you look at the names on there, the ones in red, I hope you recognize. They're people in our community that are leaders today, and they came out of this colloquium. It was a phenomenal opportunity for us to build what we called our USWRP cohort for the hurricane problem. Also, as part of that implementation plan, which was completed in 2000, we called for the formation of the Hurricane Operational Transition Center, or HOT. It's defined in the appendix, and the links are there if you want to go read it. I've shared it with Wallace. He knows it because he had to write the tour, and I said, here, Wallace, start with this. This is a good thing to start with. And so 2001, JHT was formed. This is the big outcome of all that USWRP effort. This is what gained traction with leadership and said, oh, we'll put money towards that. Now, there's a little inside story about this. At that time was when the big report came out from the National Science Foundation about the Valley of Death. How do we cross the Valley of Death from research to operations? And so they grabbed this part, that appendix, out of our implementation plan and said, hey, we're going to do something to transition. And transitions became the name of the game. So those of you working on transitions, Annette, it's been around a while. So far, JHT has been phenomenally successful. And I want to thank all the people, Chris, Lancy was one of the key people who pushed it for a long time. It was a joint NHC HRD leadership, loosely funded by USWRP, a little bit funding here and there. I think Jing was the first, Chris came next. So it's had 98 projects supported in 10 project funding cycles. So, I think this has been a big success. Maybe not as much as we would have liked, but it has been a phenomenal outcome of USWRP, one of the big successes, I'd say, from that hurricane landfall effort. So, what did we learn? USWRP hurricanes at landfall, or HAL as I call it, never had buy-in from the very top of the service of the agencies. It was grassroots, bottom-up effort from the research community. It doesn't work unless there's widespread and focused and united effort. That was a big lesson learned. Program was initially too focused on research. Therefore, mission agencies like NWS weren't interested without a path to operations. They took the JHT, sorry. But it wasn't really focused on transitions enough. The program then shifted a little bit when we got into JHT, and then it was felt we were too focused on mission agency objectives. So the research agencies lost interest, the NSFs, the NASA, ONR. The expected funding increases never materialized. Starting to sound like a broken record a little bit here because after Kevin's talk, little help from broad community and lobbying for funding increases. So this is where we stood about the time I took over as the director of HRD. Like I said, we had these unique events, 04 and 05 hurricane seasons, that started to change the picture. Also, we also have another community that we work with, and that's the Office of Federal Coordinator for Meteorology. The Federal Coordinator for Meteorology had been interested in paying attention to all the USWRP efforts, and particularly the hurricane one, because of the IHC, the Interdepartmental Hurricane Conference. And so as part of that, the federal coordinator formed a joint action group, or what they call a JAG, for tropical cyclone research. And that JAG met and put together a strategy, which became the Interagency Strategic Research Plan for Tropical Cyclones, the way ahead. And so what that did was it was multi-agency. It was coming from the operational side because that's where OFCM was interacting with the federal agencies. So we were starting to get the idea, okay, grassroots isn't a good way. Let's go top down and see if we can work with the agencies. And so we had to put together a multi-agency research implementation plan outlining strategies to address operational priorities. And that became what I think is still existing and called the Working Group for Tropical Cyclone Research, which meets every year at what they call the Tropical Cyclone Operational Research Forum, or the Interdepartmental Hurricane Conference. And the research we chose was influenced by operational priorities to provide a mechanism to get that linkage. And where we reached out to was every announcement that the JHT put out listed the operational priorities in order, the top 10 issues. And so what we started to do was, how do we map our research onto those priorities? And so the working group got together and we sat down and mapped every funding agency tropical cyclone research other than climate related onto these operational priorities that the JHT provided. And what we did was we actually tracked them. We took a snapshot every 2 years for 6 years, and we looked at how the spending and the manpower was distributed by the different agencies in these tropical research issues that were focused on the operational needs. And so we were able to capture these snapshots showing you what the cost that we're spending on tropical cyclone research is on the order of $50 million a year. When you think about manpower, we had a big bump up in 2010 because there were a lot of field programs, but basically it's the 50 to 55 million a year. And HFIP's contribution was on the order of about 20 to 25% of that effort among all the agencies. This was a very useful tool for us to start articulating the needs. And I think it was a big driver in terms of justifying why is NASA doing hurricane research? And why is ONR, obviously that was the easy one, but NASA, NSF. And so it was really informative because we had all the program managers for all these different agencies providing us their information so that we could track it. Then came the double whammy, 04 and 05. Anybody alive in 05 remembers the hoopla about climate change and hurricanes and Katrina and Rita. Oh my God, we're in for big trouble. Well, Admiral Lautenbacher looked at that as an opportunity to get funding from NOAA and the Weather Service to improve hurricane forecasts. He reached out to the Science Advisory Board. They pulled together a team of about 13 academics and business, and it was a pretty broad community of people, not just academics, to go around to all the different groups and interview them and pull together a series of recommendations. Well, we got a report, 29 majority recommendations and 8 minority recommendations. The 8 minority recommendations, I have them all listed in my presentation. You can look at them, but some of them were kind of interesting, like don't do high resolution modeling, let's use simple models. You know, we don't need those high fancy, high compute power models because, you know, hurricanes are not that complex, so we can look at them in a more simple way. And another one was turn HRD back into NHRL, which never got any traction anyway, because we were already part of AOML. So, you know, it was like non-starter. But we had to address all of those objectives because the Science Advisory Board needed a report. And so my boss at the time, Dr. Atlas, said, "Hey, Frank, would you mind doing this?" I said, "Sure. When do I have to have this thing done?" He said, "Oh, you don't have to have it done until November. This is in January." And I'm thinking, oh, okay, that's not bad. I said, okay, I'll do it. Asha Tribble was my co-lead, and we pulled together a team. And then we found out our first report was next week, and that we had to brief every part of NOAA on the chain up. And so we were doing reports roughly every 2 weeks to different groups of NOAA as we built this response. It was kind of daunting. It was one heck of a year, I'll say that. And I ended up having one of my hips replaced at the end of it. So had nothing to do with the work. I won't blame Dr. Atlas for that. So the NOAA Hurricane Plan in response became HFIP. And HFIP, where P is project, not program, because program has a different meaning in NOAA management. So we integrated and was guiding relevant cross NOAA planning activities. And we were targeting, this is, remember, 0708, we're targeting the FY10 budget cycle because that's what they're doing at this time, not looking for money until FY10. And also at the same time, the National Science Board had done a study that we had to address as well with our plan. So we had to address HRWG's recommendations, the Hurricane Intensity Research Working Group, and the NSB, and we had to do it at a fall Science Advisory Board meeting in November. It became the formal NOAA response to those reports. And so we laid out a scope. NSB was looking at a much broader set of issues: economic, ecosystem impacts, rainfall flooding, hurricane modification, preparedness and response, climate interaction. I mean, they had the whole enchilada. And of course, HRWG and OFCM said, well, you got to deal with storm surge, you got operational needs, you got forecasting uncertainty. What's HFIP going to do? And so we picked modeling a DA, observing strategies and observations, research to operational transition, and building a critical capacity. Because at the time, you got to realize there's HRD, we're maybe about 35 people. You got EMC with maybe 15 to 20 people. And then you got NHC who are taking the product. Small groups. And then GFDL, of course, was on GFDL model. I don't want to leave you guys out, Tim. So we had this small community, but they were very separate and diverse. How do we get a critical capacity to make this happen? So NOAA Executive Council, May 10th, 2007, said, Hurricane Forecast Improvement Project, go. We start working on the FY10 budget cycle. The smartest thing I think they ever did, and this goes back to what we found out in USWRP, was they assigned the AA for OAR and the AA for the Weather Service to be the chairs, co-chairs of our executive oversight board. They wanted to have top-down oversight of whatever HFIP was doing, which was, I think, in hindsight, brilliant, because it gave us the top-down. So if I had any pushback from EMC or EMC any pushback from AOML, the AAs would say, no, do it. Louis Uccellini was the head of NCEP at the time. Steve Lord was the head of EMC. Any issues they might have had, Jack Hayes said, no, we're doing this, go. And so another brilliant thing was, because I'm not a manager very well, I'm more a scientist than a manager, was they picked Fred Tepfer to be the program manager. Fred was brilliant because he had worked with Jack Hayes in the NextRad program. as a program manager. Jack knew Fred. As Jack would say, Fred was his belly button on HFIP. If he had an issue, he could go to Fred. Fred would take care of it. Another brilliant thing that Fred did was link us to DTC. You need capacity. DTC's job was supporting WRF. And we wanted to get HWRF supported. At the time when we started HFIP, there was a lot of talk. Do we go WRF? Do we go HWRF? EMC was locked dead on HWRF. Faster, runs quicker, cleaner, fits into our operational system. So we had to deal with that. WRF, HWRF, WRF, HWRF. Well, WRF was supported nicely by DTC. We needed that same support. Bob Gall and Steve Koch were the co-leads of DTC. It was a joint NCAR NOAA group. It made a lot of sense. And eventually Fred just said, Bob, come over. We need you to come over. And Bob was perfect in that role because he straddled NOAA and academic interests. He could deal with it. He was an independent. He wasn't a NOAA guy and he wasn't an academic guy. He was in between. And so Bob, coming in as a technical manager, really gave us a lot of traction. Not only that, but its linkages to DTC. I was just the research lead and Ed Rappaport was an operational lead. So all we had to do was make things keep moving forward, keep us on track. Fred and Bob really kind of did a lot of the heavy lift. So we developed a balanced and prioritized 10-year project plan, building on those reports. And we had this vision, organize this community to dramatically improve numerical forecasts in 5 to 10 years. And I'll tell you, having had a number of meetings with a number of the folks here who were at NHC at the time, this was a contentious issue. How do you set goals? We wanted to make sure that they were relevant to NHC, to CPHC, and JTWC. Because if you remember, JHT combined all three of those, and they were giving us their priorities every 2 years that we were trying to map onto. We wanted to take very operationally relevant goals. We didn't want to say, oh, we're going to improve, the cumulus parameterization, or we're going to make it do eyewall replacement cycles, whatever. We said, no, what does NHC want? And they said, if you can improve the track and intensity error by 20% in 5 years, that's great. If you can do it by 50% in 10 years, oh my God, we would jump flips. Now, nobody believed we could actually do those, but we had to set targets out there. And then we came up with this rapid intensity because rapid intensity was driving everybody crazy. And so it must have taken us 2 months to figure out how to do the rapid intensity. And we eventually, I think, Mark DeMaria, you helped a lot in all of these because you and John Kaplan were leading the charge on rapid intensification. You were setting our goals pretty much. We said if we could even identify them 90% of the time at 24 hours, that would be amazing if the guidance could do that. And 60% by day 5. I mean, these were like, we were throwing darts at the wall to come up with this. And Fred came up with the idea, this is a stretch goal. I said, what does that mean? He says, something you'd like to do, but you don't know if you can do it. Likely we won't have any money after 5 years. So, we've got to throw the dart out there so they'll give us money. Again, Fred was brilliant in this type of stuff. And then we had added, and thanks to Jamie, actually got something going, improved storm surge prediction. That kind of got tacked on to the end. And to me, it resonated because we had done structure as an important thing when we'd done USWRP. And we had these goals out there. James Franklin, God bless him, he came up with all these ways to measure improvement. We took a 3-year average from 05 to 07 of our best model guidance, and we said, okay, that's going to be our benchmark. We've got to do 20% over that, 50% over that. And so that's where these ideas came from, us trying to put this together. So how did we do it? Well, we kind of took what we found out in the USWRP plan. we have to synergize. We have to bring observations, modeling, and data assimilation together to improve the forecast guidance and our understanding. We have all these obs. Are they getting into the model? Are they being used? Well, at the time, not really. And thanks to people like Jason Sipple, who came along later, we actually started seeing big issues. The problem we had at the beginning with the model stunk. I'm being blunt. HWRF, WRF, didn't matter. They were all miserable because they were built without thinking about how all these things fit together. And I'm not being dismissive of the work that was done. Gopal was the lead of it, so I don't want to pick on him too much, but I think the first thing we did was we did a runoff, and everybody who had a hurricane model went out. We gave them 60 cases the Hurricane Center picked, and we used the same evaluation. So it was a level playing field, not, oh, I did great on Opal and I did terrible on Rita. It's, here's your 60 cases, how good are you? You can run anything you want. You can do DA, you don't have to do a DA, whatever you want. We had 9 takers. The first year after we gave them the data, DTC helped us evaluate it. We got together to meet and talk about it. And the one thing I remember was a comment by Jack Bevan, who got up and said, if I'd known these models were so bad, I would have given you easier cases. And at that point, we realized, okay, it doesn't matter which model we pick. Let's go. We took HWRF. We were blessed with having the Navy involved with this. They brought in COAMPS TC. We had a competitor. WRF was also a competitor. Wasn't operational. COAMPS TC was going operational. HWRF was operational. 2 operational systems. And we beat each other up. We learned from each other. It was a great synergy to have COAMPS running off of their NOGAPs or running off of GFS. We could see the differences, the benefits of GFS versus NOGAPs. It was a really energizing time to move forward. And we had support. How do you build the capacity? Well, you need people. Okay, so we were funding them to get people. But you had to build a place where they could work. DTC could help us with training and code management and code updates every cycle. But how do you get the computing? Where did HREX come from, the Hurricane Real-Time Experiment come from? It came from a brilliant idea from Fred. Fred said, we need high-performance computing. There was a system in Boulder called the JET that GSL had. It was not a big system, had 33,000 processors. It was pretty significant. We bought in. Fred said we had 2 or 3 million a year for HPC. We bought into the contract of the management of that system for $800K a year, and whatever else was left, we put into processors. And we built this system almost every year investment. Till, XJet Plus, we were up in the 45,000 processor range, comparable to, say, the operational systems in terms of power. And this was Fred. I mean, Fred was on the RDHPC board. He knew everybody. He knew what we needed. And without that, I don't think we'd be where we are today, because you want to get a community, you need to give them a resource. The other part was, of course, DTC. DTC was imperative because they were running HWAR training yearly. We would update the model. They would have training classes. We built up a capacity. We built up manpower. A lot of the folks in this audience might have been at these HWAR training sessions and were given the opportunity. They were given the code, given them the data, the things that Kevin mentioned that we have to think about in the future. This is how we did it. We slowly built it up. And after about 10 years, we had a pretty good capacity to do work. Unfortunately, the budget didn't follow, but that's above our pay grade. And I think a lot of people in this community benefited from those efforts. And I want to really thank Fred, not only Dr. Atlas for getting me involved, but Fred for really making it work. Keys to our success. 1, focus on operational need. Don't just say, oh, I want to make the model better. Why? What do you want to make it better for? What is your goal? What is the objective? What is your milestone metric that you're going to determine your success on? Be very specific. Don't just say, oh, I want to improve the model. It's got to be a specific goal. And thanks to the National Hurricane Center, Central Pacific Hurricane Center, JTWC, they gave us those objectives. Partnerships. NOAA research working closely with operations and academia and other federal agencies like Naval Research. International collaborators. HFIP was brought overseas. We brought it to India. We brought it to China. We were, it was exposed to multiple groups, and we were interacting and competing. And we're going to hear from some of our international partners, I think tomorrow, right, Gopal? Or is later today? And so outreach and community participation, these workshops DTC was helping us with. We had workshops on data assimilation. We had workshops on physics. We had workshops on satellite DA. R&D computing, obviously, use and test beds, DTC and JCSDA, blend traditional research activities and HFIP development. And then training. Development of NOAA's skilled workforce, recruited and trained under HFIP. Many of you in this room are exactly that. I look at you as that. That's the legacy I want to believe is what we've done. Not so much the model developments, that's great. But this community of people is really the legacy of HFIP in my mind. So the Weather Act came, you heard of Gopal, we all of a sudden we have to shift, and all of a sudden we become a program. Congress made us a program. We were a project. Then Congress said, keep improving a hurricane forecast improvement program. Okay, now comes the next task. We have to write a new strategic plan. We have new goals. We have to incorporate risk communication research, the things Jamie's telling us about. Okay, how do we do that? We've been good at the physical stuff. How do we get into this stuff? And this was a challenge. And so we wrote this next strategic plan. We still had goals, reduce forecast errors, including RI, by 50% from 2017 instead of 2007. We upped it 10 years. These are the kind of things I think, Kevin, we're going to have to think about in the next strategic plan. What are our goals going to be? Are we going to keep these same ones, or do we listen to Jamie and say, okay, how do we start to think about IDSS and things like that? This was pretty much repeating and expanding the original goals and updating them. But we added guidance on pre-formation disturbances. This was the big issue at the Hurricane Center. They wanted guidance on genesis, timing, track, intensity. They wanted us to improve it. If you can help us get 20%, we'll be happy. And then hazard guidance and risk communication. I was fortunate enough to work with Jen Sprague and Gina Iasko to put that part together, because that was way beyond my ability. And then we've been blessed to work with people like Jess and Gina and Jen Sprague to kind of pull together this social behavioral side of things. And I think we have to do more. I'd like, that has to keep developing. So in summary, HFIP successes since HFIP's inception: the model, TC, track and intensity forecast, guidance error reduced by 50% and 56% respectively. That's pretty good, I'd say. I didn't think we'd get there. I don't think a lot of people thought we'd get there. I even left out our science advisory board that we had, who kept telling us those goals seem kind of strange. How are you going to get 50% in 24 hours? when your uncertainty is 10 knots. Well, I think we're pretty much level at 10 knots now in error, almost across the board, which tells me, you know, we may be at the limit of what we can measure or the uncertainty, according to some of our colleagues who looked at that. HWRF became world class. I think Levi's here. You know, we brought HWRF to JTWC in 2014 or 13. I think 13 experimentally, 14 operationally. We went global with HWRF, so that covers all basins, all tropical cyclone basins up to 7 storms. And now we have HABs, which you're going to hear all about. I mean, I'm not going to try and regurgitate what's going on now because you guys are living it and I don't want to second guess what you're going to tell me. I want to learn. Critical advancements to strategic goals related to risk communication are underway. I think, you know, Jamie showed a slide from Castle that I think, and we'll hear more today about what's going on there. I think, you know, when we did our report that Kevin mentioned to Congress staffers, we mentioned the time of arrival graphic. That's been phenomenal, and tying that together with the wind speed probabilities. And then, of course, what Gopal mentioned, the HABs ensemble gives us potential to really start to expand things. Challenges, too many to number, but I'm going to list the 3 I think are important. Our budget is insufficient to reach the goals we've set. The unstable budget presents challenges for HFIP project planning and execution. You know, we can make all the goals and plans we want, but if we don't maintain the support from upper management, and we're continuing to work with our Executive Oversight Board, now Dr. Thur and Ken Graham are leading our Executive Oversight Board. We briefed them, they're on board. They want to take control and keep control of HFIP and move it forward, working with OSTI and OAR. We have insufficient HPC resources limit our development, testing, and evaluation. I highlighted the jets. That was a key to get us to here. We're still running the hurricane real-time experiment on the jets. The jets are, as you saw, we were buying pieces and some of them aged off. They're not what they used to be. And we don't have a continuous flow of funding that we had through the HFIP project to keep the jets updated. So we've been relying on supplementals. You've heard about supplementals. HFIP started as a supplemental. If I bring back your memory, we were planning for the 10-14 cycle. We got funded in 2009 thanks to a supplemental after Ike hit Texas. So HFIP started as a supplemental a year earlier than planned. And we continue to go under supplementals. This is the same plot that Kevin showed of our budget. The cyan blocks that stick up are the supplementals. I didn't show the one in 08, but 13, 14, 18, 19, and then 22 have all been injections of funds that have kept the capacity moving forward. The bold blue lines at the bottom are what was the NWS funds that STI managed. You saw that they dropped after 14, which was incidentally 5 years in, but that had to do with some issues that the Weather Service had with funding. Louis Uccellini, a good friend, said, you know, Frank, I can't do anything about that. That's just the way it has to be. Oftentimes when you're working with operational funding, if there is a cut in budget, they have to pay their manpower. So the danger of putting all your funds or your eggs in the operational basket are things like that can happen. The continuous part of that, the green bar, which isn't that big, but the green bar, that is the HRD budget. When I became director and Dr. Atlas supported me, When HFIP came online, I said, if HRD and AOML aren't 100% into HFIP, we've missed the boat. We are the research part. And so I've been continuing to maintain that HFIP budget or our HFIP support through the base budget at AOML. And you're going to hear more, you know, we have PHRD involved, HRD is involved. You know, we're expanding a little bit of the support we have by adding our oceanographic partners in this. Obviously, there was a cut in support of academics, which hurt some of us, our ability to develop. Fortunately, they keep coming. Thank God for them to keep coming and supporting and working with us. And finally, I want to say thanks. There are a number of people on here. I couldn't name all of them, but the key players for me were Fred, Bob Gall, Rick Spinrad, who was the OER director when we started and really was instrumental in pulling us through, now our NOAA administrator. Jack Hayes. When I first started, Mary Glacken was in the interim. She was acting as the director, but Jack came in right away. The real benefit of those two that I'll say that a lot of people don't know, Jack and Rick worked together in the National Ocean Service before they became OAR director and NWS director. So Jack and Rick had a good relationship and that helped. Louis was a strong supporter from the USWRP days when he was the head of the Office of Meteorology. He thought the hurricane landfall was the best of the USWRP. He was always supportive. Of course, Dr. Atlas, who gave me the ability to do what I did. And I want to thank Ed Rappaport, good friend, been deputy director, acting director of NHC for many, many years, retired about 3 years ago. And then I want to really thank some of the support people. Nashima, Let, Siksha Upadhyay, Ed Mifflin, Nicole Kurkowski, Young Sun Jun, Aaron. I mean, these are all people I've worked with as program managers after Fred. At DTC, Leisha and Louisa. At EMC, Vijay, Gopal, Alvi Chow, James Franklin, Mark DiMaria, Jamie, who kept saying, where's my money? To do the storm surge. Bill LaPenta, God bless him. And then Scott Rader. A lot of people don't know, Scott was Admiral Lautenbach's chief of staff. We had this plan put together in 2007. Then 2008 happened in Big Ike. Scott happened to go to a meeting in OMB where they were talking about all the money that DHS was spending on the recovery from Ike, billions of dollars. And he just sat in the room, and afterwards he went up to the general, and he said, you know, NOAA has this little plan that I think could help you save money. And the general said, okay, send me something. He sent them our plan. Next thing I know, Fred, Louis, and Scott are meeting with OMB. The next thing I knew, HFIP was in the supplemental for 2008. So you never know how things are going to shake out. But Scott played a key role just being an ear in that development. And I want to thank my good colleagues in the Navy, Ron Ferrick, who worked with me on the working group for TCR, Russ Ellsbury, who was a key player in USWRP and on, Jim Doyle now, Fuqing Zhang really set the tone for the DA. Ryan Torn, who's been with us from the get-go, one of our development people, John Moscatis at NRL, Tim and Morris, key players in all these projects that we developed. I want to thank you all. It's been a fun ride, and I look forward to hearing about the future. Thanks.